Hello, you beautiful people, and welcome to another episode of The Journey Inward here on Mindset Central. And as per usual, I'm joined today by Gareth Davies. Please welcome Gareth. Hello, Gareth. How are you doing?
Hey, Venerina. Great to be on board for another Journey Inward. I cannot wait to get into what we're talking about today.
I know, it's going to be a good one, isn't it? Very controversial, I'm afraid, and I'm sure a lot of people might come back at us with their own opinions.
Hopefully.
Which is great. That's what we want to hear. But I think more than anything, it's we should just give people food for thought, don't you? Just to make people think a bit. So without any further ado, let's get on to the topic. And before I go on any further, I've got something I want to just, I had this philosophical thought this week, because of something personal that was going on with my dog, and being told that one of the options was to put her to sleep, and then I kind of had this whole philosophical thought about life and death, and people around me were giving me advice, and so anyway. My question is this. If an animal is truly suffering, right, we have the right to put the animal to sleep. By law, we can do it. Right. And the vet has to agree with it. Now, most of the world regard this as a compassionate action because we see it as helping the animal, relieving the animal from its pain and suffering. Yet, if it was a human being that was in pain and suffering, the law actually forbids us to take another life.
Right.
Okay, so my question is this. Does it mean then that we think less of our animal partners because we can just take their life as we, if we think it's appropriate? Or does it mean that we think less of human beings because we're not being compassionate towards them? Or does it actually mean that we have no real estimation for animal life compared to human life because we put all this value on human life that we can't take it, but we don't, but since we can take animal life, are we not putting any value on it? So my question is kind of like, who do we actually value the most? Or is it a question of value at all? So there you go, Gareth. Hey.
Well, I think everything you mentioned right now, all of those what ifs are accurate. But I think the only value that we place is on ourselves or our immediate family and friends. And anything beyond that is like, oh, well, that's sad, it's horrible, but hey, I'm good.
Yeah.
You can empathize, if I can say. You can empathize with people. You can say, "Oh, well, that's terrible. That's horrible." But hey, I'm cool. I'm good. And as far as animals are concerned, most people don't even think of animals as conscious entities. They're just like these things. When you're, I had a friend once who worked at a slaughterhouse.
Yeah. And
he was telling me these, and I'm sitting there thinking, man, I don't know how the hell you could do that. I would lose my mind working in a place like that. And he was saying, well, you get used to it, right? I mean, he wasn't actually killing animal. He was working in IT in the slaughterhouse. But he would occasionally have to go down onto the floor where they were killing all these pigs, and it was there'd be blood all over the floor and stuff, and it was the way he described it was pretty disturbing. And they would literally slaughter thousands of these animals every day.
That's horrible.
The truck would pull up. They'd open the truck, and they'd herd all these pigs out of the truck. They'd put them in, and the pigs would go in one end, and meat would come out the other. And I remember asking him, so when they get the pigs off the truck, and they're kind of herding them or corralling them down this pathway to certain death, do they know? And he's like, oh yeah, they know.
I believe that.
They totally know. They know it's coming. They panic and they freak out, and they know.
Funny you should mention abattoirs because once upon a time, many, many, many years ago now, I had a business consultancy firm, and one of my clients wanted to set up a sausage factory and sausage shop. Mm-hmm. So when they came over to Madeira to live, I had to take them around the abattoirs because they needed to find a source for their meat, for the fresh meat for the sausages. And as we walked into the abattoirs, you could smell what I regarded as fear.
Yeah.
And I said to the guy, I smell this really strange smell, which was a kind of a smell of, it was a smell of animal, it was a smell of, feces of an animal, it was a smell of urine, the whole lot mixed together. But for me, it was like you could actually sense the fear in that smell. And I said to him, do the animals actually, do they really know that they're going to die? And he was like, oh, yeah, they know it. They can sense it.
Yeah. And that's an interesting idea in itself, because in the story you just mentioned and the one I did, you're herding these pigs off this truck. Now, if these are just dumb animals, just like, walking flesh, right? Even though, well, what do they know? As far as they know, hey, we're going on a cool little trip today, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And they go down and they start panicking and freaking out, knowing they can't see anything. They can't see other pigs being slaughtered. They don't, but they know. They know that they're going to be killed.
Yeah.
How is that possible? What's the mechanism there? What's going on? How do they know?
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? I mean, often we talk about a universal consciousness, don't we? We talk about the interconnectedness between humans, but we never actually talk about the interconnectedness between humans, animals, and vegetable life forms. Plants or trees, right. Or if you look in pagan traditions, Wiccan traditions, anything esoteric, most of them worship Mother Nature. They worship trees. People go out in the woods and do circles.
Right.
And so I'm sure that this universal consciousness, that we all tap into it, including animals. And from that, I mean, if you have an animal who's sick at home, doesn't the vet say to you, "Oh, make sure you don't show your emotions"? Mm-hmm. Or have you never had that from a vet?
No, I've never had that from a vet, but I can relate. I do understand, because I've owned a bunch of dogs in my life. Mm-hmm. And they know, they're not dumb animals at all, not even close.
No, not even close.
You can see the wheels turning in their heads sometimes. When they look at you like, okay, right? It's the feeling that I have, and I think this is probably accurate, is that everything is conscious and aware, except, of course, stuff that we create, like, cars and computers and houses and stuff. But anything that the earth kind of gives birth to, whether it's a tree or a frog or a dog, a cat, a lion, elephant, whatever, they're all conscious, they're all aware, but to varying degrees. Right? There's like degrees of consciousness. Now, these degrees of consciousness I think are very prevalent in people too, right? Throughout your life, you meet people, and you wonder
if they're conscious.
Exactly. Don't you? I do.
I do.
I've met lots of people who I feel are just automatons. Just basically mindless robots who have no clue, or if they do, they have no way to verbalize it. They have no way. They seem like they're just like a robot. Just there's no thought. They just go through the motions.
Maybe they just choose to be that way through ignorance.
Right, yeah,
or maybe it's not a choice and it is actually ignorance.
Well, no, it very well might be. I mean, but I've met many people in my life who I cannot possibly imagine them sitting at home contemplating their existence. Those kind of thoughts never, ever, ever, ever enter into their head. Ever.
But then isn't that something a little bit different? That's probably the arrogance of human nature to think that we're everlasting, to think we're invincible, we're eternal, we're heroes,
Yeah.
It's kind of like, that's kind of ignorance, I think.
But I think for me, it seems as if there are shades of there's black and white and everything else is shades of gray, right? So think of white being conscious, black being unconscious, and then everything shades of gray in the middle, right? So at the lower end of the spectrum, you're just some mindless automaton who's barely aware, or maybe not even aware at all. And at the other end, you're completely awake, conscious, self-aware, whatever. And then in between, there's all this shades of gray, all these levels.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of color spectrum that I just described applies to people and animals. Mm-hmm. A dog is obviously much more conscious and aware than an ant. Right.
Or is it? We don't know. We've never really studied ants properly, have we? Apart from colonialization. I mean, look at the way they organize themselves.
Right, but
they work in colonies. Sure. They work together. They're actually better organized than humans.
Right, because it's a very basic or automatic machine-like. It's just part of their programming, so to speak. There's no awareness. They follow a predetermined set of instructions that's pre-programmed into them. They don't deviate from that. There's no thought. There's no consciousness. It's just...
There's no thought because they can't actually express it.
Right. They're pre-programmed. It's just, it's like programming a computer to print out a piece of paper. Well, all it's going to do is print out that piece of paper. The computer's not one day going to say, oh, hang on, I'm done with this printing paper shit.
Actually, you could be wrong there, Gareth.
Well,
Don't say that.
Well, I might be wrong in about 40 years, but as of today, I think I'm right.
I was going to say this could get us into a whole new ballgame because the latest thing I heard about computers is they can actually read your mind now. They've developed a new software or a new experiment that they're doing, which is actually brain reading.
Sure, but it's saying like that's if we could get down to the basic genetic level in ants, we can program them too. We can program them to do different things. Consciousness, though, is they do different things of their own volition. We're not involved, or any outside influence is involved in their output, so to speak. They do it themselves because they're self-aware. They're self-determining.
Or is it? Maybe we could argue that point on another show. Okay. That's a really interesting argument because, you see, I think, and I've had this thought for quite some time now, that the way they're going with HARP, my favorite pet subject, yeah. And radio impulses or radio frequencies and sonar impulses, I'm wondering if this is actually what they're aiming for, and that's kind of like tapping into the consciousness to change people's behavioral patterns. Mm-hmm. Because just think about it, we all vibrate at a certain frequency. So who's to say that consciousness doesn't vibrate at some kind of frequency? Yeah. All it is, everything is atom particles. And now that they can isolate the atom particle, how can they actually manipulate it? And how will that affect us? I mean, yeah, no, this is a whole new ballgame we can get into, perhaps on another show.
Okay, yeah, sure.
We can very, very interesting point.
Certainly put that on the back burner.
Yes, definitely. I think a few of our listeners might want to get into that one as well.
Yeah, totally.
But coming back to the topic then, so why is it okay, all right, for us to play God with an animal's life and yet not be able to decide to cease the suffering of a human being, of a loved one? Why do we actually have to wait for nature to take its course in one case, and in the other case, we can just absolutely say, no, that's it. Okay, don't want it to suffer anymore. Just put it to sleep.
There was a great movie I saw in my youth, many years ago. I remember watching it on television, and it starred Richard Dreyfuss, and it said, "Whose life is it anyway?" And I remember being on late at night, and I thought, I'll give it a shot. You know, I remember that guy from Jaws, so you know, I watched this movie, and the movie was very much a thought-provoking movie, and it presented ideas that at that time in my life I was completely unaware of or had never even contemplated. And it basically concerned an artist. I think he was either a painter or a sculptor. I don't recall which one, but he was one of those. Either he was a painter or a sculptor. And creating his art was his life. That was all he existed to do, was to create his art, whether it be painting or sculpting. Don't remember which one. And he gets into an accident, and he survives, but he's paralyzed from the neck down, completely paralyzed. He's still, completely conscious, articulate, completely aware, but he cannot move any part of his body at all. And after a while, he decides that he no longer wants to live because he can't do what he wants to do. So the movie's all about the whole ethical and moral dilemma as far as him wanting to die and the courts and legal system saying, no, you can't die. And I think that was the first time that I'd ever been presented with that kind of moral dilemma. Up until that point, the thoughts had never even popped into my head, never even thought about it.
There was a case, I don't know if you remember this, I think it was last year, but it's been going on for the last 10 or 20 years. There was a war veteran, who was only, I think he was 30-something or 40-something, and he was left with I don't know if it was the Gulf War syndrome but it was really, really bad. And the guy was practically paralyzed. He was in a bed. He relied on people to wash him, feed him, 24 hours care. Yeah. And he'd been arguing, or he'd been requesting or petitioning the government so that he could die in the UK. And obviously he couldn't get help to die, and I think it was after so many years he actually burnt to death with a cigarette on his bed.
Was that intentional or an accidental death?
Never disclosed.
But he got what he wanted.
He got what he wanted. But obviously a brutal way to go.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's...
if he burnt to death.
Right.
I mean, that is a brutal way, isn't it?
Well, I would assume that is incredibly painful. But you keep hearing that people who burn to death, the pain only lasts for a little while because the nerve endings are the first things to burn away.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you've seen them online. There have been some videos posted about some of the nuns and the monks in Tibet that have been it's autoimmolation, isn't it? It's called. Right. And you can feel the suffering, but it only lasts a few minutes. But even so, I mean, I've been in an aircraft when it's lost an engine and the plane started plunging, and wow. It only plunged for about 10, 20 seconds, but that 10, 20 seconds was almost like a lifetime. Yeah. So can you imagine being on fire for 3 or 4 minutes before the pain is too much that you just pass out and die, or that you feel nothing in the nerve ends?
Yeah.
But, why is it okay then that we can say, okay, I decide to put my animal down, but I'm not going to kill my aunt who's, can hardly breathe. She's paralyzed. She can't feed herself, and so I can show compassion to an animal. Is it really compassion though?
Well,
I can't show compassion, to my aunt or uncle or whatever.
Yeah.
And is that compassion? What are we talking about here? What are the differences?
Well, I think it is compassionate to a certain. I mean, if a person or an animal is in pain, and they cannot be fixed, you've tried everything. The doctors are telling you, you know what, we cannot do anything else. This is it. That kind of suffering is something that, would you really want to put that animal or that person through that kind of pain and misery for a prolonged period when you could just end it?
So, okay, let's look at the spiritual aspect of this, shall we?
Okay.
A little bit more. In Buddhist philosophy, the end goal is to relieve all suffering, okay? So Buddhist philosophy doesn't really believe in putting an animal down because it's suffering, because every day that it suffers in this life will be a day less that it suffers in the next life. So because Buddhism doesn't look at one lifetime, it looks at the series of lifetimes and the karma that you carry over,
right.
Okay? Which we've talked many times about karma. So the suffering is viewed as a good thing, because every bit you suffer, you're cleansing for your next reincarnation.
That's kind of convenient.
Yeah, it's not convenient, but it's one way of looking at things. Okay,
Right.
In Catholicism. Okay, and in Christianism, there was the flogging, wasn't there? Monks would flog themselves,
right,
to actually self-inflict suffering, so that they could experience this suffering and they could become wiser for it, they could become better for it, they could purify for it. Now, auto-flogging might be acceptable in the BDSM world, but I can't see that it's pleasurable in any way, shape, or form when you've got blood coming out of your back, and you've been at it for hours and hours and hours. So you're creating then this suffering as a human being that we would gladly take away from an animal.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why people would inflict that kind of pain on themselves. You just mentioned two of them, right? One is, intense religious belief systems, and sexual pleasure, right? But other than those two things, pain and suffering is something that people either consciously or unconsciously try to avoid. When I'm hammering a nail into a piece of wood, I'm very aware that I don't want to hit my finger, right? Because I know that it'll hurt like hell.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
So I'm not, I wouldn't consciously think, I'm going to hit this nail and I'm going to slam my thumb with the hammer. That'll be great fun. No, I'm going to try my best to avoid that. I mean, sometimes it's unavoidable, right? Whether you're not paying attention or whatever, it's an accident, whatever happens, and you get hurt. But for the most part, in your head, you're very much aware that you do not want to be in pain.
Absolutely, yeah. Because you've been there, you've done that, you know what pain feels like.
So you try to avoid it. Now, there are exceptions to that, as we just discussed. Some people are attracted to that kind of pain and suffering. They get off on it, or whether it's or the whole religious experience. You mentioned, the self-flogging, and to get them some idea to get them closer to God or enlightenment. But for the most part, pain is bad.
So, okay, well, let's look at another aspect. When do we actually decide? I mean, we can't decide in a human being's life, okay, when the time's come that we just need to say, okay, goodbye to them, because we just let nature run its course. So, technically, when we're deciding for an animal, okay, to put them out of their pain and suffering, etc., how do we know that we'll get it right and we're not just committing an act of murder? After all, it is still a living being.
I don't know. I mean, it depends on your point of view. I mean, taking another conscious entity's life, I guess, could be considered murder, right? You're depriving somebody of life or some entity of life. But if that entity is in, is pain and suffering, and you can feel it. You emphasize. Oh God, if I can say this word, put my teeth in.
Have a sip of coffee.
I know, but you feel it. I mean, when you have an animal and you have a close emotional bond with that animal, and the animal is suffering, right? And you know that the animal is in pain. It affects you. It affects you emotionally, and you want the pain on that animal to end. And you'll do anything. Now, people who are not animal lovers, people who could care less about animals, when they hear stories of dog and cat owners spending thousands and thousands of dollars in vet bills to give their dogs operations or medicines, or they look at them like they're mental cases. You're out of your mind. You spent what? You spent 10 grand on some dopey dog? What the hell is wrong with you? Because they don't understand that even though it's a dog, but it's part of your family. It's part of it's part of you. You love that animal.
And it's another living being. It breathes, it eats.
Yeah.
It sleeps, it's awake.
Right.
It's a living being.
So in many ways, I think euthanasia is an act of compassion. In many ways, I think it is.
So surely the argument should be that we should be allowed to do it with human beings as well.
Yeah, we should be able to kill humans whether they're sick or not.
But that's a whole nother show.
I saw a T-shirt once that said, "You're only alive because it's illegal to kill you."
Yeah, well, yeah.
But
given the recent events in Connecticut, that's probably not a joke to make today.
Well,
really,
I know. I mean, but I mean, it's with people also. I think there comes a point where even the doctors will be like, there's nothing we can do, and you can pull the plug. They're brain dead, or all we're doing is keeping this carcass breathing and pumping blood around it. The person that lived inside this biological machine has long since left the building, right? It's just this, it's like keeping the engine running on your car, but the driver's gone.
Yeah, that's slightly different though, isn't it? Because somebody who's on machines in a hospital, the setting is there, isn't it? The doctors are there to monitor and say, okay, we need to switch them the seat.
We don't always know, though.
No, this is also very true. But what I mean is, if it's somebody who's bedridden at home, like there are so many cases in the world of people who are bedridden at home, they've got a relative looking after them, and they need 24/7 care. Right. They're incontinent most of the time. They might be diabetic.
Sure.
They've got all these health issues, and yet nobody can do anything to be compassionate. When we use this word compassionate with an animal, we forget about it most of the time with humans, but there's nothing that can be done.
Sure.
Euthanasia is not acceptable. Actually, I think there's only one place in the world that it's acceptable, and that's Switzerland, isn't it? Isn't it legal now in Switzerland?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
I think it's the only country in the world where euthanasia is actually legal. Yeah.
Yeah.
I won't swear to it, but I think that's the case.
Well, there's been many cases, though, Venerina, where the patient has been in a coma for 6 months or maybe a year or two, and the doctor's like, you know what? There's zero brain activity. All we're doing is keeping this body functioning on this machine.
Yeah.
I think we should let him or her go. And then it's up to the family and the relatives or whatever to make that decision. But there has been many cases where that same scenario has played out and the family has been like, no, we have to, I can't face it. We got to keep them alive. Even though that the doctor's saying, there's no brain activity, they're brain dead. And then 6 months later, they wake up.
Yeah. This is why one of my questions was, who are we to play God, to decide on this life and death?
Well, if we get into the whole playing God thing, then what do we have hospitals for? I'm sick. Okay. Hey, good luck with that. Later. I just got hit by a car. My legs are broken. Hey, you know what? It's God's will. Sorry, pal. Why are we giving people medication? Why are we putting them in hospital? Why are we trying to ease their pain? If it's God's will that they're going to get hurt or damaged, then so be it.
And you know what, Gareth? The frightening thing is Jehovah's Witnesses actually do think like that.
Yeah.
They will let their children die with appendicitis or something,
sure.
That is a natural occurring process in the body, rather than have them operated because it is God's will.
Well, when something like that happens, as sad and as twisted as we might view that, I cannot help but kind of admire their conviction. Because when something like that happens, in the back of my head, I'm saying, you know what? Those people got balls, because they're living the way that they're living their belief system, right? Whereas so many, let's be honest, the vast majority of religious people out there, it's lip service or it's cultural. They're not living their real deal,
Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
Okay.
What you're saying practically is at least they're being true to their beliefs rather than being hypocritical about them.
Right, as most people are. Right.
But again, even if people are being true to their religions and they're being true to their faith, are they not being, a little not true to being a human being? From the moment we're born, we know that our destiny is to die. Now, everything that happens in between, we know this body's not going to function at some point. We know something is going to go wrong. But surely then, as we're talking about compassion and life and death decisions, shouldn't we show compassion to somebody to let them have this healing?
Yeah, and we do. You can't, regardless of your belief system or your culture or whatever, you can't turn off those emotions. If you're a normal human being, not some maniac psychopath, you're going to feel compassion, right? Whether you want to or not, it's going to happen. You're going to get that feeling. But as far as picking and choosing, like the whole, you mentioned the Jehovah's Witness thing right now. We might look down, they're letting their child die because, that's tantamount to murder. It's horrible. Because our cultural beliefs or our belief systems differ from theirs. And we feel, for whatever reason, that our belief system is more superior to theirs. Therefore, we should have the power to enforce our belief system on them. And we see the same thing worldwide through different cultures. Like the West will look down on the Middle East or the Muslim cultures. They're mental cases. Look at this. They're stoning people. What's up with that? They're crazy. We shouldn't allow that. Well, who are you to tell them how to live their lives and explore their culture? That's their deal.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Even though we look at that as barbaric and primitive and they're out of their minds and all that stuff, whether we're right or wrong is kind of irrelevant.
Yep. There's the famous saying, isn't there? I may not agree with everything you say, but I will defend to the death the right you have to say it.
But where's the line drawn where we have to act? We have to kind of stay. If their culture that has existed for thousands of years doing this thing, and we're becoming aware of it maybe in the last 100 years or whatever the case may be, At what point do we say, no, we're not going to allow you to do that no more because our culture is morally superior to yours?
That's what's been going on, though, isn't it? If you think about the wars that we've seen all across the Middle East and African countries, isn't that exactly what's happening, though? The West is trying to impose their own moral judgments of Middle Eastern behavior. That they're trying to change and reform.
I think superficially and on the surface, yes, because they want to sway public opinion and get them on the same side. So they should, but underlyingly, there's something else going on. Because let's be honest, do you honestly think the governments of the West or a government in general could care less about what goes on, culturally in another country? Please.
No, of course not. And these are discussions and conversations that we've had on Mindset Central, exactly. The main one on a Sunday.
Yeah. We're kind of bleeding into different areas here as far as, but let's get back on track then. Let's jump back on the main thrust of the conversation before we get too convoluted and who knows what.
Yeah, before we end up in a political discussion again. Right. Yeah, no, I think that, of course, governments don't care really what happens on a cultural level. But when you talk about human rights groups, yes, they do care. But they kind of piggyback on the back of governments who go into bomb for other reasons, don't they? Yeah. So then human rights filter in and then they start, trying to impose Western ideals and Western expectations and all that kind of thing. So they are interfering in something that should come from within, shouldn't it, really? If talking about cultures, if a population wants to change a culture, they'll change it. They don't need interference from other countries.
Yeah, and over time, I mean, it's just part of the human experience. When you interact with other cultures, when two cultures meet, they kind of hybridize each other. They think, oh, well, hey, you guys do that? Hey, that's a great idea. We like that. Hey, guess what? We're going to steal that idea and incorporate it into our culture, and vice versa. So they kind of build on it,
But isn't it interesting that no culture believes in taking a human life out of compassion?
I know. Yeah, well,
isn't that ironic?
Well, it's in the kind of culture rule book, too, that you can't take a life regardless. You're not supposed to kill anyone, right?
Yeah, but isn't that interesting that every single culture around the world believes the same thing in that regard?
That's a red flag in itself.
But that says, doesn't it say so much, though?
So what do you think it says?
Well, I'd need time to think about this, but
okay.
But it's just like religion. The basis of every single religion around the world, no matter what the religion is, the basis is love your neighbor,
right?
Don't kill, don't steal, and all these good rules. But do people follow them?
Well, the rules are malleable. The rules are there. You pick and choose, right? Oh well. I mean, I think we talked about this on the last episode where I mentioned, love your enemy, do unto others, and all that stuff, which is quite often kind of forgotten about or sidestepped. When for me, that's the core. That's the center. That's the rock.
Yeah. It's definitely the rock. And yet so many people forget it. So many people don't follow it. So many people at the first sign of, somebody disagreeing with them, it's like you either play in my sandbox or I'm going to stamp on your feet.
Sure.
And I kind of see that same attitude really when it comes to life and death decisions about humans and animals. I see double standards in everything.
Well, it is a double standard, and it is a contradicting scenario because you're healthy and you're looking at your loved one, whether it be your husband, your wife, your aunt, your uncle, your brother, your sister, whatever that you love. That's been a part of your life for X amount of years, you don't want to lose them, right? You're being very selfish in some respects because you don't want them to go away. They're a part of your life, your history, your kind of path that you've been on. And for them to go away, then it's sad because it's an end for you, right? You're going to miss them. Like a chunk of your life is vanishing. So it's a very selfish act in some ways. Now, that's the kind of thing you have to balance because this person that you love dearly is in a lot of pain and suffering, and you don't want them. Obviously, you don't want them to be in that kind of pain and suffering. You want that pain and suffering to end, but you'd much rather it end and then be okay and hang out with you some more, right? But unfortunately, sometimes that's not the case. So you're in this kind of you're kind of fighting with yourself in some respects.
But selfishness works two ways, doesn't it? Especially, it works both ways in everything. If you decide to put an animal down because it's suffering, right? You can be selfish because you just want to not have to deal with the suffering anymore,
right,
as well as the animal not being in pain, of course, and getting rid of the suffering of the animal. But it is kind of selfish when you decide to do that, at the same time that it's selfish when you decide not to do it. In a human being's case, you obviously, you like you said, you're very selfish that you don't want the person to pass away because you want to spend more time with them.
Right.
But at the same time, have you ever noticed when somebody dies from a long illness, human nature sometimes has a way of denial that looks like it's not caring so much for the person who's dying, when in actual fact they're probably caring, they care enormously. But when the person dies, there's actually that sense of relief as well, which is a little bit selfish. Why? And this is why a lot of people feel a little bit of guilt,
sure,
when somebody dies, because they feel the relief for themselves that they don't have to cope with the suffering anymore.
Right, exactly. And and you get that guilt, like with an elderly parent or something, right? And your mother or your father is bedridden, and you're the oldest child or the only child, and you feel responsible to take care of them and do what you got to do, and you do it, right? But it's probably a chronic pain in the ass. You'd probably much rather be out there doing other stuff, but you do it because hey, that's your mother, that's your father. You're gonna take care of them. But when they finally do pass, it's a relief for two reasons. Number one, you feel that you've done a good job. You helped them through that period. And number two, you don't have to do it no more. You can get on with your life.
Yeah, and that's where the guilt sets in.
Yeah.
So there's quite a lot of controversial elements, aren't there, really, when we talk about euthanasia, whether it's for a human being or whether it's for an animal. They're both the same.
Right, yeah. Because, it's just part of your family. Whether it's a human or a cat or a dog, there's an emotional connection there.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we come back to the same question that we started with, really. And this is, I think, a good way to wrap up the show by saying the fact that we can actually take animal life and not a human life, does that make us more or less compassionate and more or less respectful of those lives, of human life or animal life? That's a good question to think about, isn't it?
It is. And a thought just occurred to me that it probably has a lot to do with legality also. There's a lot more legal stuff that goes on with a person rather than an animal.
Well, that would be selfish invested interest, though, surely, if you're talking about legalities, especially if you're talking about wills or...
No. I mean in regard to the law.
Right.
The law looks at a human being far differently than it looks at, your dog or your cat.
Give it another 5 years, it won't.
But you know what I mean? It's
come on, what rights have we got anymore?
It's very, very different. If a dog gets run over in the street, well, then it's we put it in a black bag and we throw it in the garbage. We're done. We don't do that when a person gets run over.
But if the governments had their way, they probably would.
Probably true, yeah.
Well, Gareth, thank you very much for joining me once again today on the journey inward. Great to talk to you again.
Yep, we'll do it again very soon.
Absolutely. And to all you people out there listening, give us your feedback, please, because it would be really interesting to see what your take is on matters of euthanasia and life and death decisions. And until next time, as Gareth would say, peace out, humans.
Yes, farewell, human life forms everywhere. Okay, bye-bye.
Have a great week. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.